Hi, I want to talk to you today about the topic of guilt and shame. I know that's a topic that many of us do not like addressing because it deals with some negative feelings, negative actions that we want to keep covered. We want to just put in the back of our minds or to keep it under the rug. And to be honest with you, that's exactly what the devil wants you to do. He wants you to just not address it because that's one of the ways that he can keep you in bondage and not really walking in the purpose and calling that God has on your life. And I want to share that revelation that I received. And like I said, it deals with, I believe, symbolically and metaphorically with guilt and shame. And I just pray that this just blesses you and helps you helps you get further towards being delivered to being free from guilt or shame if those are areas that you're dealing with. And so the scripture it's actually two scriptures. Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, and then Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. So I'll read both of them. Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. Verse 7 of chapter 3. At that moment their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. And what I want you to realize in these scriptures, what is so amazing to me is that in both scriptures they're naked, but in chapter 2, verse 25, it says, "But they felt no shame." But in the next one, chapter 3, verse 7, it says that they were ashamed or felt shame because of their nakedness. So what happened? What made them transition from that place of being okay with being, in their bare skin and just their skin versus feeling like they need to do something to cover themselves? It was sin that entered in. In chapter 3, if you read the verses 1 through 6, it explains that the serpent, who was the devil, he came to Eve and he tempted her and he tricked her into eating from that fruit, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so, as a result, she had convinced her husband, Adam, to do the same. And then their eyes were open. It says their eyes were open. And not meaning that they were blind, their eyes were closed, but their eyes were open as if a scaling or a covering came off. And they were able to see things that God did not want them to be exposed to. And so as a result, they felt that their nakedness was something wrong with that. And what I see symbolically and metaphorically with this is that that's how we are. When we become born again believers, we're so excited. We are fired up. We feel one with God. And this is what was going on with Adam and Eve after God created them. They were like him. Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, it tells us that God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And so they were like God. They were made in the image of God. They had a spirit. And so what happens is that everything is well with them. And we even see in chapter 3, all is still well until they eat from that fruit. And so because they felt ashamed and they realized that they had no clothing on, their next thought was, oh, we need to cover ourselves. And that's what we try to do with sin. Whatever that sin may be. No sin is bigger or smaller than the next. But that's what we do when we see ourselves or feel ourselves going into sin or know that through our actions we've committed sin, we try to cover it up. But you may try to cover it up with a lie. You may try to cover it up with manipulation. And all that does is bring you farther and farther away from God. And that's what happened with Adam and Eve. But the good news is Jesus Christ, he laid down his life He resurrected by the power of God, and he allowed us to have a way back to God the Father through him. And so, just as Adam and Eve, they were separated from God, but notice Jesus, through the cross, he allowed a way for us to reconcile back to God the Father. And as a result, we have the opportunity to be naked and feel no shame, just as Adam and Eve did prior to the sin. Because Jesus' blood paid the price for the penalty of sin, which is death. But because we believe and we have accepted that free gift, we can be naked and unashamed. Meaning that we can walk in the freedom of what God has called us to. We can walk in the freedom of knowing that no sin can keep us bound, because sin is not more powerful than the grace that Jesus made available to us. And so I encourage you today, just as I'm encouraging myself, do not be bound by sin. Do not be bound by shame. Do not be bound by guilt or even embarrassment, because those are the things that the devil wants you to be bound to prevent you from walking in your purpose and your call in your life. But just remember that Jesus said in John chapter 3, verse 17, he said, "For the Son of Man came not to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." So Jesus is not condemning us. He's inviting us to come. And so I just pray this word encourages you on today, that you don't have to just stay where you are, that you can just walk in the freedom and the purpose in which you were created.